afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We just run through this. Much of it has been covered in more rigorous and technical forms. So what I'm going to do, my presentation will run more like a test by moonlight so that you get relaxed. You have the soft side of the story. We're talking about the best practice structure of a debt management office for effective operations, as well as that relating to system of debt recording, reporting, and transparency. Now, for introduction, we would like to block the presentation in 3 places. First, we want to be able to look at the functions of debt management office because we are talking about how it will be organized. First of all, we should know what it does. Because if you understand what you want to do, then you know how to organize to do it. So we go to the functions. Then we look at the appropriate organizational structure that fits that function. And then we consider, thirdly, what are the transparency, recording, and reporting correlates of that best practice structure. That will mean that we will make the presentation under what are the functions, where should the DMO be located, what should be the type of supervision over the debt management office, what are the types of relationships the debt management office should have with other ministries, departments, and agencies. And when we look at all that, it helps us to imagine what should be the structure, given where it should be located, who should supervise it, whom does it relate with. That will help us to know where we locate it. As I said, when we finish all that, we can then see what are the reporting, debt recording, and transparency imperatives for that. This is only reliable. It's only reliable. Not reliable. Not. You want to go for where's the app? Sorry. Forward.
Yes. Yeah. No. This is for.
Where's the forward? It's forward.
Forward. This is backward. Yes, this is forward. Yes.
So this forward.
Yes.
This is backward.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm learning my own ICT here. Okay. Now, as has been mentioned, debt management office has three major offices. And the summary is the first office deals with the acquisition of the loans, the debt for financing. The second office deals with the policy strategy and risk management. And the third one deals with the recording, reporting, and accounting. And more importantly, debt servicing. Now, the model best used are two. One is that some debt management offices are located in the Ministry of Finance. The other is that they are located as an autonomous agency of government. There's a tendency for debt management offices to be located in finance because most of the time, the jobs of debt management historically are done by Ministry of Finance because debt management as a separate entity is a relatively new development. And in some cases, there's some friction because even when best practice suggests that in a particular country, it's better to have it as separate, there'll be a tendency for those who have been in charge of debt management in Ministry of Finance to insist that it should still be in Ministry of Finance. So we have to understand that bureaucratic issue, which does exist in many countries of the world, advanced and developing. However, the recommended best practice is that the DMO should be an autonomous agency. It might be reporting to the Minister of Finance, but it should not be a department in the Ministry of Finance. And as we go forward, it will answer one of the questions that were raised in the morning about providing enhanced facilities and possibly remuneration for debt managers. Now, one of the reasons why you want a debt management office to be an autonomous agency is that you want it to be professionally developed. The counterparties of the debt manager, you are talking of the World Bank, you are talking of the LDB, you are talking of IMF, and you are talking of the capital markets, domestic and external. These are parties that work with certain standards and certain levels of technical skills. And those are the type of skills that the debt manager is supposed to match. So if you want the debt management office to deliver, then you should put the debt managers at the same level with those professionals in those other types of financial organizations. So that is very critical. So that would answer the problem of having special facilities and even special remuneration for debt managers in certain countries because they have been separated from the Ministry of Finance, from the normal bureaucracy. In addition, the fact that they stay separately means they are not encumbered by the usual bureaucracies. You must go from the assistant director to director to sign. After the assistant director, you go to the deputy PAMSEC, then you go to the PAMSEC, then you go to the minister and all that. That type of bureaucracy and red tapeism that is not suited for debt management, given the type of job function it does. Now, however, even when the debt management office has been located separately, it still has to report to a cabinet minister. But it would not do that through any other intermediary. It has to deal straight with the minister so that the minister can push forward that management agenda to the cabinet. So that's the whole essence of that preferred arrangement. Now, where should the debt management office be located? That's what we had just explained. Who should supervise it? Now, the job of debt management office is very important for a country. It's not a low-level function. You are talking of the biggest financial portfolio in almost every country. And you are talking of a practice that will determine whether a country will be in distress or not in distress. Therefore, it must have high-level supervision by implication. That's why, in a typical debt management setting, the supervisory board should consist of the minister as the chairman of the board, the minister in charge of finance. And other members should include the governor of the central bank, because many of the issues the DMO deals with also relates to monetary management. And in any case, when it comes to development of the market, you have to cooperate strongly with the monetary authorities to move from the monetary end of the market, the short end, to the long end of the market. It should also include the accountant general of the country, or whoever is in charge of the treasury. Now, because many of the jobs DMO does have a lot of serious legal implications for the country, particularly when it comes to external borrowing. You have to sign so many contracts, and somebody who has the expertise, like the Ministry of Justice, have a close look at the agreements and other documents. So the Ministry of Justice is usually a member of board, of the supervisory board. Of course, the head of the debt management office should also be a member and should serve as the secretary. Ideally, with the necessary alterations depending on the peculiarities of a country, this should be how it should be constituted. Let me point out that in certain countries, you might find out that the presidency, maybe the vice president of the country or the prime minister, could be a part of the board and would be the chair. Indeed, that is the situation with Nigeria from the beginning up to now. But that is a historical thing. It's not necessarily the best practice, but it reflects a peculiarity which had to be solved. And that was the fact that the DMO of Nigeria was established when Nigeria had debt overhang. And the DMO was established first and foremost to deal with that problem, in addition to the usual functions. So, foremost in the agenda was getting debt relief for Nigeria. And of course, talking of debt relief from the external creditors required a lot of high-level political and diplomatic initiatives. So from that point of view, it was considered useful, indeed necessary, to have the president be part and parcel of the Debt Management Supervisory Board, so that also, if decisions have been taken by the board, it will not be difficult for it to sail through at the presidency, because the vice president is already the chairman of the board. So that's how that arrangement came into being. So what this implies that while we have the general configuration of a supervisory board, depending on the peculiarities of each country, there could be one or two changes in what has been presented here. Now, taking into account all this background, the functions of DMO, where it's supposed it could be located, the type of supervisory board it should have. The question is also the reality, which is what should be the configuration. And that's part of the thing we touched in the morning. The issue of that this structure is front, middle, and back office. But just as I said, and of course we did mention what are the major functions of each of these offices. The front office being essentially responsible for prospecting negotiating, assessing, and procuring debt. The middle office being essentially responsible for policy, strategy, and risk management, all the necessary frameworks, including leading in-depth sustainability analysis works and designing the medium-term debt strategy, which have been mentioned in the previous presentations, very essential tools for managing debt. The back office, of course, deals with making sure you have accurate recording, accurate reporting, as well as making debt service payments, which is, again, very important function. We have already explained in the morning why it is necessary that these three offices should remain separate, because you can see that those three functions need somebody to check. It needs some mutual control, mutual checks, so that the person who is procuring the loan is not the person who is making the debt service payments. And so also, the person who is procuring the loan is not the person deciding on the guidelines for procuring the loans. He's not in charge of the due process. He's not in charge of risk management. He's not in charge of providing what you must do and what you must not do. So that's the essence of the separation of functions. And as I mentioned in the morning, it's also important and it's useful. It's beneficial because it generates the benefits that come from division of labor, in the sense that people are focusing on certain things. There's focus of responsibility as against the function of responsibility. You know who to hold responsible for what from time to time. It doesn't mean, I think this is important for those from debt management office, it doesn't mean that if you recruit into DMO as a back office person, you must be in back office until you finish your career. Indeed, the ideal thing is after some years, you move from one to the other, from back office to middle office, from middle office to front office. So you are a rounded public debt manager. But what you are saying, at this point in time, there are groups of staff responsible for each of these functions. Again, as I mentioned in the morning, ordinarily, each of these offices has a department. The front office, portfolio management, the middle office, policy strategy and risk management, and the back office, debt recording and settlements. That's the administration, 3 offices, 3 departments, and then the admin human resource department, which is a service department. However, as I said, again, each country has to look at its circumstances, each stage of development in debt management, and its own political structure to know whether there are adjustments to be made. And that's why if your country is a federal system, you have the central government and you have sub-sovereigns that are fiscally autonomous. It makes sense for you to think in terms of a possibility of another front office possibly called Strategic Program Department. In the case of Nigeria DMO, it was called Strategic Program Department. And even though the DMO in Nigeria was established in 2000, this additional office did not come into being until 2008, which was 8 years later. Okay? Because you have to do the basics first. So you don't need to really develop all the configurations beyond the 3 standard ones. If there are additional ones, you don't need to bring in those additional ones from the beginning. Okay. So such a department would then serve the needs and capacity building of the subnational debt management agencies or units or whatever nomenclature you give them. But the important thing is that for a federal system, it is very necessary that you also have debt management capacities at the subnational level, which can be well then coordinated by the central office. Again, so that you have democratization of debt management knowledge, and also so it enhances transparency to the extent that the more other arms of government or other levels of government have good knowledge of what is happening, the better. Otherwise, only those at the center will be breathing it down the throat of the subnationals, and they will be at a loss as to what's happening. So they should be part and parcel of it. So in that case, you will spend some resources, some time to build the capacities of those subnational offices. In the case of Nigeria, that's what we did between 2008 and 2012. It took us 5 good years because Nigeria has 36 states which are fiscally autonomous in addition to the Federal Capital Territory. So strictly speaking, Nigeria has 37 strong subnationals. So the Debt Management Office at the center spends some time and resources serving as capacity builders to develop those 37 debt management agencies in those 37 subnationals over a period of 5 years. I don't have time here to go into the details of the various activities that were carried out to reach that end. But we had to, first of all, design a template that covered all the major initiatives that will be covered so that you know that this agency or unit is now able to do almost everything you also do at the center. So that's one reason why you have to have an additional front office department. They are still front, middle, and back, but the additional offices belong to those same front, middle office. Like in Nigeria, the strategic program department dealing with the subnational also belongs to the front office because it is these subnational offices that will decide on what their states will borrow, even if they are borrowing through the federal government. Another reason why you could have an additional department is that you may reach a stage where you want to have a robust domestic debt market, as has been emphasized throughout the presentations, earlier presentations. And to develop a domestic debt capital market, you will have to decide whether it is necessary or not for you to have a separate department that focuses on that particular, that particular assignment. In the case of Nigeria, again, we thought it was wise, given that in the long run, we will continue to depend on, we need to be sure we have a strong domestic debt market. We also needed to be sure we have a strong entry into the Eurobond market. So for those reasons, we thought it was important to have what we call a market development department. It's still part of the front office, but another department. So that in Nigeria, the front office has actually 3 departments belonging to the front office, which is the conventional portfolio management department, then the department catering for the subnationals, and the department catering for development of the domestic bond market, as well as entry and presence and activities in the international capital market. So again, every country has to decide which configuration is relevant to it, and at what stage it brings on board these additional departments. Of course, for transitional countries, generally, one would think that unless you have already started on these 2 additional departments, this might not be exactly the right time. In general, I say in general, there might be reasons why you must, but in general, one would think that given the circumstances in which you are, this might not be the best time to think in terms of establishing a more complex organization. Now, based on what I have said, it means then we can think in terms of when we are saying what is the best possible configuration of a debt management office. It means we have to think in terms of a basic one and an enhanced one. That's why if you look at the table, the basic one is shown in green, where you have the portfolio management department as the front office, the policy strategy and risk management department as the middle office, and the debt recording and settlement department as the back office. But when it comes to the enhanced form, which is in red, under the front office, you have the standard portfolio management department, but in addition, you can see you have the market development department, which is responsible for developing the domestic capital market as well as active presence in the international capital market. And then you have the Strategic Programs Department, which is responsible for subnational debt management, capacity building, and institution building. Now, of course, based on what we have described, then you can have an organogram that represents what we have just said. And so that you have 6 departments, 3 of them under front office, and then you have the middle office with a department, the back office with a department, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, you should always have a department that's not core, but is very critical in providing services, human resources, administration, ICT services, possibly legal services. And that is the organizational resourcing department. So that's what an organogram will look. Again, this has to be adapted to reflect the peculiarities of each country and this economy at different stages. From time to time, you have to also change the structure. The structure you started with, after 5 years, 7 years, might not be suitable. So you have to review and look at it, and consistent with your strategic planning, you have to decide whether you need to change the structure. Now we go to the last part of this, which is debt recording, reporting, and transparency. Now, when we talk of best practice debt management, an implicit aspect of the best practice is that the data you use should be accurate. The way you store it should be robust enough. And the way you disclose it, make it available to the public and to stakeholders to consume for different purposes should also be strong. So what we are now discussing are what are the debt recording, the debt reporting, and the transparency correlates aspects of good practice debt management. Now, first, common practices, again, is that either in terms of how do you do it, the techniques, is either you do it manual or you do it using Microsoft Excel, or you do it using a complete system, like the Commonwealth debt recording systems. I'm sure many of the countries here are using debt management record systems, or they're using debt parts from, or they're using Meridian, Commonwealth Meridian. If you use manual, of course, I'm sure there's hardly anybody, any country that will be using manual, but at least theoretically it existed, where you take records of your loans, their terms and conditions, by putting them in a file in physical form. That is dangerous, first of all. Those documents are not reliable, they can get lost. Two, there's the challenge of accuracy. And thirdly, there's the problem of incompleteness. Where then you could go to the next level, which is electronic, which is essentially using a computer and using Excel, which is a simple system of recording. It brings some improvement on the manual, but it's not exactly what you should aim at. Among other reasons for that is the fact that it does not give you the scope to easily integrate your data system with other applications. And also, it's not compatible, it may not be compatible with the debt recording system with which you need to supply data from time to international organizations, including the World Bank and the IMF, whom you must relate with. So you also need to have a data recording system, a database system that can have a handshake with other platforms in your own economy, including the private sector, central bank, Secretary of State Commission, the clearing houses, and others. So you need a robust system that also can speak to those other platforms whom you must relate with. So that's the major reason why you must deal with the most sophisticated platforms. And in addition, for international comparison, for international collaboration, you need also to have a system that is recognized internationally and are used globally. Now, we have talked about this, and one of the advantages of using a robust system, debt recording system like CSD or OMS, or Commonwealth Meridian or DEMPAS, is that they have features for control, internal control, for self-validations. When you are making entries and you have made the wrong entry, because of a previous entry that relates to that one, it will reject it to pointing out that there's an error. Because what you are stating in that part is inconsistent with what you are stating in other parts. So that's one of the advantages. Now, you keep good records because you need to produce reports. Various types of reports, which you see in the handout you get, because these reports are used by various stakeholders. They're used by the debt manager himself to know what's happening. They're used by the Ministry of Finance, those in charge of the fiscal side. They're also used by the monetary authorities. They're used by the market. They're used by credit rating agencies. And they're also used by those who have oversight on the Public Debt Management Office, including the Parliament. So for all this, you really need good records. Of course, there are many types of records. I will have the list of them, which you will see later, which you can see in the manual you get. Debt outstanding, debt flow, disbursements and debt service, loan-by-loan transaction, creditor category. Necessary to know, first of all, creditor category, very critical to talk about that. You have the external creditors, you have the domestic creditors. Each type has its own peculiar implications in terms of public debt management. For example, as has been mentioned implicitly in the presentations, if you are talking of your external category, you are talking of foreign currency denominated debts. So you have to get yourself worried about exchange rate volatilities and all that, whether you have generate enough exchange rate, enough export revenue for you to be able to service the debt as and when due. You have to worry about whether the monies you are borrowing from external, are you using them in such a way that over time they will generate revenue, not only locally, but possibly they will be directed to export-oriented projects that will help you to generate foreign exchange in the medium to long term, and therefore helps diversify your sources of repayment of your loans as time goes on. So those are some of the considerations. Even when you come home, in terms of domestic debt, you will also have to worry the types. Short-term debts, long-term debts. You have to worry about who are the holders. In some countries, the central bank holds, either for legacy reasons or for crisis management reasons, as the Honorable has presented in the case of Ghana. Ideally, you don't want the central bank or the monetary authority to be one of the major investors in your issues. Rather, as time goes on, if there are legacy debts held by the central bank, the ideal thing would be to start by securitizing those debts to bring them to the market so that they will not be held by individuals, households, and companies, and also financial institutions, but not by the central bank, because there's an implicit conflict of interest when the central bank is really involved in funding government, since the central bank is there to set policies, including interest rate policies. So there's certainly a conflict of interest if it is a major investor that is going to be earning interest from investment in government securities. And given that usually its source of funds are essentially money, printed money, so there's some danger in that. So you need to help central bank maintain its independence and credibility by not encouraging it to be a serious investor in government securities under normal circumstances. Okay? Now, so as I said, there are many dimensions of the reports, but I'm just talking about the ones that are crucial. You will always read the list. Now, on the issue of transparency, I've attempted to define transparency in public debt management as easy and timely access to reliable and commonly understandable information on public debt. It should be timely. It should be easy to understand. People, when we mention a term, all of us here should know exactly what we mean. We should not have different interpretations for the same concept or the same terminology. Okay? So transparency requires that you put the language in such a way that all parties will have about the same understanding of what you are saying. There's no ambiguity. Now, of course, you will appreciate that debt recording is critical for transparency. Because if you record the wrong thing, you are going to pass the wrong information to people, to stakeholders. So that in itself is non-transparency. So at the foundation of transparency is accurate debt recording, accurate accounting. Okay? Of course, that means again that if you are talking about transparency, you are almost talking about the other side of the same coin, which is accountability. Because when we have a common understanding on an issue, particularly financial issues, it becomes easy for us to know when things are going right or when they are going wrong. So transparency is closely linked with accountability. And that's why transparency engenders confidence of the public and all stakeholders in the debt management process. If the debt management process is transparent, your people, the common people, the stakeholders, the lawyers, the bankers, the civil society, the households, we have confidence what they're doing. So when you are talking about government borrowing, they will be in a position to objectively support or disagree with it because they understand what you are saying. And they know that the information you are passing to them in your various reports are accurate. Then they can help make informed decisions. So also, for the cabinet or for the parliament to take decisions in the oversight function, for example, as Skipper mentioned, the parliament has to approve loans, most of the loans. So for them to approve, they have to have a good information on the public debt status. What does the existing portfolio look like? What are the terms and conditions of the new loans you want to acquire? So those things should be well understood, well appreciated, well known for them to take the right decision on them. Therefore, we can summarize or we can say a dimension to transparency is effective communication, which means these pieces of information should be made available through various media, including the websites of the DMO and the Ministry of Finance, okay, through annual reports, through quarterly reports, and indeed through active interaction fora with various communities of the society. You interact with them, they ask questions, you answer, so they understand what you want to do. You want to go to issue a Eurobond, you should, before you go for the roadshow, you should also have meetings, have fora to interact with the civil society, with the bankers, with the lawyers, with the National Assembly. They ask questions, you answer, so they understand what you want to do. And indeed, in the case of Nigeria, we took a special initiative as far as transparency is concerned. We decided to have a program whereby we will be going from one institution of higher learning, polytechnics, colleges of education, universities, from one, almost all of them, moving from one to another, having discussions with the students, telling them what debt management is all about, allowing them to ask questions, so that in that process, you democratize the knowledge, so that more and more of the population are in a position to evaluate, to assess what you are doing, to critique what you are doing, to make inputs, to critique, observe, correct, and advise, and even suggest innovations. So there are many ways you can use to improve the transparency. Now, I think there are current challenges in transparency, and I think one of them was mentioned in the presentation by Juan in the morning, which has to do with hidden debts, the debts that are incurred but they are not well recorded or they are not well communicated to the public. sometimes because of the way they have been cured. If debts have been cured through the process of mortgaging, maybe some minerals for some loan, they may not be obviously exposed. So hidden debts are a challenge. So it's left for each country to look at how things are going and know whether there are things that are leading them into hidden debts. Another type of challenge which I thought I should mention is that because of the challenges of COVID and the challenges of Ukraine war and all that, many of the countries of the world, even developed countries, had to allow their central banks or monetary authorities to do some intervention. Again, Sepeta mentioned it in his presentation. Now, there's a challenge with that, which we should appreciate in case in future such a situation arises again. And that is, it is very easy, it is much more easier for irresponsible governments to abuse the proceeds from the intervention of central banks. So among the things we should look at closely is that our countries, when they did these interventions, where central bank printed money to solve problems, to provide money for social security, to provide money for education, to provide money for health and all that during the COVID and other such crises. All those interventions by the monetary authorities, were they transparent? Are they fully well accounted for? Or could they be part of the issues that have led to both domestic price instability and possibly exchange rate instability? So the lesson from there is that in future, the issue of monetary intervention to help in crisis should be handled with extra care and with extra risk management tools, because there's evidence to show that there's a tendency for it to be abused. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope my moonlight story was not too boring. So thank you for listening, and I appreciate your feedbacks. Okay.
Merci, monsieur le directeur, pour votre brillante présentation. Moi, je voudrais intervenir un peu sur les détails que vous avez donnés sur l'organisation à mettre en place pour assurer la supervision. C'est-à-dire, dans mon pays, par exemple, nous, on a le Comité national de la dette publique. Je crois qu'il joue ce rôle. Mais dans ce comité, il y a certains ministères qui sont membres, notamment le ministère du budget, le ministère du plan, donc les ministères économiques qui font partie. Ça, c'est le niveau politique. Maintenant, il y a une commission technique qui aussi est chargée, en tout cas, de faire les travaux préparatoires et soumettre à cette instance politique. Mais quand je vous ai suivi, vous avez parlé de la présence, par exemple, du ministère de la Justice, c'est-à-dire dans une telle structure. Je ne sais pas quel peut être le rôle du ministère de la Justice dans ce genre de structure. Et voilà. Merci.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evelyn Ward-Nissen. I'm from the General Auditing Commission of Liberia. I have two questions. Before I ask my questions, I just want to express my thanks and appreciation to the AFDB for organizing this conference and to all the speakers for the information shared so far. I'm particularly grateful as an auditor for being part of this conference. So like I said, I have two concerns. The first one has to do with the presentation that was just made. You talk about, as part of the structure, how auditors are part of the structure from the table you presented. And I could see that it's particularly important for auditors to be part of the structure of the debt management unit or section or whatever it's called, particularly to enhance check and balances and for the purpose of transparency and accountability. So my concern is, or my question is, what are the key things we are supposed to be considering as auditors of debt management? And the second one is, my second question is, I can see that the entire conference is talking about capacity building, challenges as it relates to debt management capacity, and auditors are key players in this. So what is the AFDP plans in considering us auditors of supreme audit institutions as part of the key players to be able to benefit from this capacity building? Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur Général, pour la présentation. Je voudrais que vous reveniez sur la remontée des informations pour la production des statistiques sur la dette. Puisque dans certains pays, on peut avoir plusieurs ministères qui sont impliqués. Par exemple, la dette bilatérale peut être gérée par le ministère en charge des Affaires étrangères. La dette liée au projet gérée par le ministère en charge de la planification. Et peut-être les trésors qui interviennent sur les marchés. Donc, pour le cas du Nigeria, est-ce que vous pouvez revenir comment se fait la remontée des informations? Surtout au Nigeria, il y a l'État fédéral, il y a aussi les différents États. Peut-être l'État fédéral aura des dettes à garantir, des dettes des États que l'État central garantit. Si vous pouvez revenir en tout cas sur la remontée des informations. Merci.
I think my question is related to the last speaker. My name is Namao Alolo, and I'm the manager for knowledge management and information services at the African Development Institute of the African Development Bank. So just a quick question related to what the gentleman just mentioned. In a federation, for example, you did highlight something in a federation. And my question is, to what extent should the centralized debt management office relate with the subnational governments, basically? And to what extent does the central debt management office have influence over debt contracting and basically debt usage of debt, right, for productive purposes? So that's my question. Thank you.
Youbi de la délégation de Madagascar, merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. Une question par rapport à l'existant au niveau du Bureau de la dette de Madagascar. Le Bureau de la dette de Madagascar se charge également du suivi et évaluation des projets pour évaluer la performance des projets sur financement extérieur, pour voir si les fonds affectés sont bien gérés efficacement et dans l'efficience. Et dans ce contexte, donc, la question se pose de savoir si cette tâche doit se trouver dans le front ou le middle ou le back office. Telle est la question. Et il en est de même pour la question sur les statistiques. Il y a la production des statistiques, mais il y a aussi l'analyse proprement dit des statistiques. Et donc, dans ce cas, ça doit se trouver dans quel bloc ou bien ça doit se trouver dans un autre département. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Really enjoy your presentation because it is laying out a very important office on how we can manage our debts and roll it out for the benefit of our people and for the value of the resources. In our context, our constitution in the division of the powers gave some national level, which is the states, powers to negotiate and borrow. And then I do not know actually whether one of them, we have 10 states and 3 administrative areas, which is 13 units under the national government. Some of the states governments, they are talking about borrowing, they are talking about loans, but I never heard anybody is talking about strengthening the debt management office at what? At the state level. Here become very important request or question through the ADI. At the national level in the Ministry of Finance, I am aware about that there is an office, it is a debt management office. Now, the structure and figuring out the office is yet we can see, but I think there is some other institution were put in which it is not like case of Nigeria. And this we need to look at the impact of this institution, like some like legal department in the office of the president is member of that committee, loan committee. Now, we are talking about capacity building. How can we strengthen the debt management office in the Ministry of Finance in order for them to be a capacity builders for the subnational level? And I want to connect it with the accountability, because it's very important. In our case, the dissemination of the concept of the accountability, especially at a lower level, subnational level, is very critical. Therefore, in my committee, being a chair of Public Accounts Committee in the Parliament, South Sudan, we are proposing for making National Accountability Conference, we want to change the narrative, and we want to see how we can create a homegrown accountability approach, so that at the lower level, those institutions, they can now grab and understand the importance of accountability, management of debt, and related to the peace and security in the country and development. So these are some of the submissions that I want to forward to this noble engagement for some of the activities we are doing at home, and how now we can pick up from this forum and to strengthen the debt management in the Ministry of Finance, and even the Office of African Development Bank, to support my committee to conduct national accountability conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very important questions and observations. I will be very brief because there are many, but I will be explicit. The first question was raised about other MDAs that should be part of the process, and that comment was right. Budgets and planning should always be part of it. Office of Statistics of the country should be part of it. Accountant General's office should be part of it. And as I said, part of the reflection of this inter-ministerial, inter-MDA relationship is why the supervisory board was constituted the way it was constituted, picking heads of the monetary central bank, picking the Minister of Finance, having the Accountant General, having the Minister of Justice. Again, the question was asked, why justice? Justice because, particularly for external borrowing, there are a lot of legal documentations. And because borrowing externally delves into the area of sovereign risk management, not only sovereign financial risk management, but sovereign political risk management. It is important that the appropriate officials in the Ministry of Justice scrutinize all the documents that have to do with external borrowing. But you made the important point, which is that the DMO needs to be related with these other MDAs. Indeed, to conduct a debt sustainability analysis, even if DMO has the full in-house capacity, it still needs the inputs and observations of these other MDAs, Ministry of Finance certainly, Central Bank certainly, Accountant General's office certainly, Office of the Statistics certainly. Indeed, many of them do provide inputs into the process of either debt sustainability analysis or medium-term debt strategy. So they are necessarily involved. In addition to the MDAs, it is important to mention that in Nigeria, to conduct debt sustainability analysis, we also involve the Securities and Exchange Commission, who are responsible for regulating the capital markets, as you know, so that whatever we are doing will be consistent with their own guidelines and with their own plans for capital market operators. So it is true that debt management organizational structure should reflect the fact that you must build relationships with various stakeholders for various purposes. And as an aspect of that, we have generally what you call the Fiscal and Monetary Policy Coordinating Committee. Again, points to some of the issues both Joa Pradeli and the Honorable Sekepa raised in their presentations. The fact that debt management must take into account that much of what challenges you deal with are outcomes of activities of other authorities, like the fiscal authorities and the monetary authorities. So at least to that extent, you must have a way of coordinating the activities of all these and having relevant committees where you review various issues. In Nigeria too, debt management office cannot go overseas to raise money in the international capital market without the preparations incorporating the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Central Bank, the Accountant General, and the Ministry of Justice, so that they make their own impulse. And even when we are going to the market, we go with them so that they also understand what they are doing. And that is part of our own mutual capacity building. So you are right. For Liberia, the issue of auditors are critically important in every type of enterprise. In debt management, there has to be an auditor. There has to be the office of an auditor. In the case of Nigeria DMO, they report directly to the Director General, who is the Chief Executive. Of course, the role they play is in two areas, the internal auditors that I'm talking about. They deal with the internal administrative auditing for the organization. Because as an organization, DMO also has its own internal transactions, expenses, and others. So they make sure all those are done appropriately with due process. They also make sure, there are sections of them that make sure that issues related to the pure debt management function are also audited without prejudice to the fact that you remember that the back office is supposed to be keeping the records, to be reporting, but also the internal audit has to make sure that the back office is producing the reports at appropriate times and with the agreed or mandated periodicity. So those are important jobs. You also talk about the Supreme Audit Authority, the Auditor General in the case of Nigeria. Yes, again, just as for every other organization in the country, public organization, the Supreme Audit Authority has a lot of job to do. And the summary of it is that it has to make sure that the Debt Management Office produces the reports it must produce, circulates them as it should circulate, both to the Parliament and the Cabinet, and that the Debt Management Office is obliged to produce annual reports audited by external auditors, professional external auditors, just at every company that is what it has an external auditor. So also DMO recruits external auditors every 3 years. We change our external auditors who independently audit our work, which is now presented to the National Assembly. So their job is important. Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other people who participate in loans. That was the third question. Now, that comes to the issue of best practice. What you are saying happens in certain areas where various agencies, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or Project Office, they incur loan on behalf of the government. That is not proper. That's why we are discussing here best practice. How should it be done? Now, when it comes to state guarantees, and that will link to another question that was asked, which I will not repeat. The issue of state borrowing should be such that is subnational. They should not borrow externally on their own. By the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, for example, states can only borrow through the federal government externally. Which means even when a World Bank project is to be located in a state, in a subnational, those World Bank or African Development Bank loans are procured by the federal government and unled to the subnationals. So in that way, there is a control. And of course, before the federal government agrees for them to borrow, even internally, as the procedure, there are guidelines So if any subnational does not meet with the guidelines, it is not allowed to borrow, even from the banks, from the commercial banks, local commercial banks. So that, and it is put in black and white that any commercial bank that does not follow the procedure of getting approval from the Minister of Finance, which is, again, provided by DMO, and it grants a loan to a subnational, it does so at its own risk, which means the rule is best practice that subnationals should borrow only according to the guidelines. And most of the guidelines specify they should borrow with the clearance of the Central Debt Management Office. And there's a good reason for that. It is because you have only one economy. If there are default and downgrades of the credits, it affects the whole economy, not only even the government sector, it affects the private sector. So because you have only one economy, even if you have many governments, you have only one economy. So in terms of borrowing, the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as well as the Fiscal Responsibility Law, makes it clear that all these borrowings must be coordinated. So states cannot borrow on their own without the approval of the federal government. So that becomes a solution for that. And that's the role we play in the case of states. Now, but more importantly, the Central Debt Management Office makes sure that it helps to build the capacity of the state debt management agencies to do their job well, by helping them to build institutions, and by from time to time going to review their performances. In agreement, it's not like they are supervising them as masters. No, it's to work with them cooperatively so that they can compare notes, find common problems, and solve those problems. So in Nigeria, the DMO up to now continues giving, just as African Development Bank continues to give training to every DMO in Africa. So also the Debt Management Office in Nigeria, the Central one, continues giving capacity building support and technical support to the subnationals. Okay, so I think that's much of what we can say. Building capacity for subnational. In the case of Sudan, South Sudan, yes, I think the National Assembly, the Parliament, will be in the forefront of making sure that the country has a proper debt management office with adequate autonomy. I'm sure the Honorable Member of Parliament, you had the advantages we spelled out, why it is necessary that debt management should be on its own. It doesn't mean that it has unilateral declaration of independence. It still reports to the minister, but it should not be reported to the minister through any intermediary. So that, and they also should have direct access to the National Assembly, the chief executive of the debt management, should have direct access to the Parliament so that it can make presentations to them, it can discuss with them. And there should be committees of debt management in the Parliament, which should relate with DMO. So I think the most important thing for me to say about the situation of Sudan is that the Parliament should be at the forefront of making sure South Sudan has a best practice debt management office. From there, other things will follow. Thank you very much.